But something which was very interesting and worth taking note of is this judge in the Northern Territory who has come out and said that the cult of anti-racism is causing huge problems, particularly for Indigenous women. Now, this has echoes, Rita, of the whole story from Britain. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing, but the same basic principle is underlying it, in that people are too scared to talk about abuse because they're scared of being called racist. So they don't call out abuse within a particular Aboriginal community or call out an Aboriginal man for abusing the woman because they're afraid to be labelled racist. So she's saying this cult of anti-racism is causing serious problems, something we've been saying on the show for years, but it's now, a judge is now saying it.
Absolutely. Justice Judith Kelly, a courageous speech, a factual speech, and a really important one, because just like the example you gave in the UK, and it's happening here, but in a different context. We're not talking about grooming gangs here. The victims are the most vulnerable in the community, women and children. That's the young women who don't have a voice, who are being treated horrendously, who are victims of awful violence, sexual violence in numbers that should shame the entire country when you look at the
So
statistics.
we'll just read out exactly what she said. So this Northern Territory Supreme Court judge says that, quote, a cult-like ideology of supposed anti-racism is stopping people talking about a plague of domestic violence towards Indigenous women. So note that very carefully.
Yes.
In a speech to a group of female lawyers this week, Justice Judith Kelly said false claims of individual and systemic racism, there we go again, detracted from the search for solutions to the far higher rates of domestic violence in Indigenous communities. And she says, quote, talking honestly about the problems that exist and encouraging honest and open public debate would have to be a good start. So that's Justice Kelly. But what, James, this is what Jacinta Price has been saying for years, and Best Price, her mother. They've been saying this for years. They've been sidelined. You've got Anthony Albanese rushing around with American basketball players trying to sell The Voice, when one of the best and most intelligent voices in Australian politics is sitting there in the Parliament being ignored for that. She's been saying this very, very subject for years, James.
Well, absolutely right. And this is the thing. This is where the real disconnect happens between The Voice and the actual problems on the ground. You know, they already have a voice parliament. They have a voice parliament, 11 of them.
11 great voices.
Jacinta Price.
And you may not agree with any or all of them, but they're there.
And none of that actually solves, and none of what they're talking about with this voice here, which is just about giving activists a say, would do anything
to help this.
Because the activists already have a say. They've got the Council of Peak Bodies. They've got all of these other, alphabet soup of organizations that are all making representations and consulting all this stuff. And they've actually, in many cases, only served to make things worse. If you look at the history, of where these outback communities come from and the good intentions behind them and behind creating these communities, it has been a case of horrible good intentions going really, really awry and astray at every single stage of the process. And so I don't know why we think that, if we just keep doing the same thing and entrench this even further into the Constitution, that this will actually make things better. It won't.
Well, it won't. And I'll be talking about The Voice later on in the show, so we'll get into all of that.
But just one stat, Rowan. The fact that in this country, Indigenous women are 35 times more likely to be hospitalised due to domestic violence than non-Indigenous women. Again, that's something that is horrific. It should shame everybody, and it's something that should be at the forefront of discussions, but it's not. Nobody talks about that. We're talking about
let's hope people start listening to this
referendum, the flag, Australia Day. Why don't we talk about things that actually will save lives?
And well done to Justice Kelly, brave woman.
Yes.